Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Lane. I'm the president of Liftport Group. We've been doing these shows for about 5 months now, so pretty happy about that. This is the DareGreatly Space Podcast. We do this twice a week. Um, if you're finding us on YouTube or LinkedIn, which is where most of our followers find us, you can also catch our shows. Recently, we started posting them to Spotify, so I think we have 7 episodes up there as well. And we'll post links to those here in a moment. We've been doing this for about 5 months now, and it's been really great. The show is really at that intersection. Kind of 4 parts we kind of focus on. We focus on national policy, everything from new documents that come out to how the sausage is being made, right? How do those meetings become national policy? How do those policies become programs and research development, and ultimately dollars for the community? We focus on infrastructure, what's being built in space. We focus on the money of space, the commercialization, not just deals being made, but kind of a broad environment. And we focus on the people, right? So we kind of tend to have 3 kinds of shows. We have shows that focus on space news, and we have shows that focus on new legislation and new documents that have come up. And then the ones that I tend to like the best are when we have guests. So tonight we have a terrific guest, Christopher Johnson. I'm going to bring him on in a moment. But the big news of the day is SpaceX. Starship tried to launch this morning, turned into a wet dress rehearsal. I don't know about you, but I was one of the 850,000 viewers watching the SpaceX live stream this morning. If you count SpaceX's channel and all the others like NASA Watch and Everyday Astronaut and some of the other ones, there probably were north of 2 million people on the internet watching this. And I know that one of our recent guests, one of the co-founders of the Space Frontier Foundation, co-founder of Space Fund, and co-founder of Deep Space Industries, Rick Tomlinson, took a drive from Las Cruces, New Mexico. 13 hours later, wound up at Boca Chica. So, he's not the only one who drove and made that pilgrimage to watch space history happen. So I guess you all probably know it's going to be pushed off for another 2 days. I'm curious to see what happens next. Me, I have high hopes for this. Anybody who's been watching this show knows that I helped coin the phrase Starship Singularity, because I think that the launch of this massive machine is going to change humanity in ways that we don't know yet or don't understand yet. So similar to the way that the transportation infrastructure of a 747 or the steam engine or the railroad, they changed the way the world operates, and I think that this rocket is going to change things in a way that we don't yet understand. So I've been anxiously looking forward to it. My friend Peter Garrettson wrote a pretty interesting paper on it. I've got one kind of in the works. I was hoping to finish mine before we launched. I don't know if that's going to happen by Wednesday. But yeah, it's going to change everything. So keep posted to that. And then with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring in Chris Johnson. We're going to talk about his background at the Secure World Foundation. So, Chris, thanks for joining us tonight. It's let's see, are you in Colorado?
No, I'm based out of DC.
DC, okay, all right, DC office. So it's quite a bit later for you out there. Thanks, we appreciate you being here. We have guests from all over the world. I think 2 weeks ago we had another ISUer, Raphael Rodajan. He's coming in from Zurich, I think. So 1 o'clock in the morning for him, and we bring in people from London and from Mumbai. So yeah, we tend to kind of get people in the middle of the night. So thanks for joining us tonight.
No problem.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your background. Who are you? We refer to it as your origin story. Let's spend about 10 minutes, not so much digging into the Secure World Foundation and the work you're doing over there. And we're going to get to some of the law and policy stuff, and we're going to get into certainly some of the lunar developments and some of the moon dialogue conversations. But before we get into that, let's talk about your background. How did you get here? Who are you? What's your origin story, please?
Well, thank you for that. And that's a tough question, because you want to know how inclusive, or how much do you want to talk about?
Let me put some parameters on there. We have a lot of people that listen and watch this show that are old time space people. They've been here for a long time and they know the ropes. But there are so many people getting into this field now that we always try to kind of provide paths. For a long time, and you've seen this probably yourself, for a long time, the only way you could get into this field was if you were a rocket scientist, right? That made up term. There's no such thing. There's kind of no such thing. And so we want to make sure that people know there are various paths into this industry. So that's kind of why we want to showcase it a little bit.
All right, perfect. I mean, yeah, there definitely are a variety of ways to slowly get into this field, from, like kind of sneaking in because there isn't, a track or a pathway for you. And that's definitely how it is in space law and in many of the social sciences that have to deal with space, is that, I never thought that getting into law would somehow lead me to working in the space field or the international diplomacy field related to space, or the space governance field. So, I mean, briefly, very briefly, I'll say I'm from Michigan, and I'm from one of the suburbs of Detroit. And at least in Michigan, when I was growing up, no one really thought about the space industry as an industry that you could work in. I mean, maybe if folks grew up in, the southern states where they were near a NASA center, but it's, may as well have been thinking about, like, I don't know, working in Hollywood, or I don't know, working in getting a job like, it just was not on people's radar that this was an area that they could work in. And I mean, of course, I grew up in the 80s. I'm Gen X. I grew up reading comic books and, paying attention to, like, Star Trek and Star Wars, and having some general awareness of, like, fantasy and space as a place we could go. I also remember that when I was in high school, my physics teacher played every Friday near the second half of the semester, played episodes of Cosmos. Like on Fridays, it was Cosmos. We'd watch one episode of Cosmos, which was, I don't want to say that it was like transformative, because I had like a lot of experiences like that, but that was certainly like inspiring and educational. Is that it was, you see that where you are in history is part of this larger story of scientific discovery, and that, quote, we stand on the shoulders of giants before us. That it's stuff like that I think made some type of impression on me. But I never had any like pressure on my parents even to go to college, to be honest with
Right.
you. My
Yeah.
parents were like, well, if you want to go to college, you can go to college. It's not a big thing one way or the other. Maybe you could get a job at a trade school. It doesn't matter to us really what you do. And so when I graduated from high school, I was not really even interested in going to college.
Okay.
I was like working. I worked at a car wash. I worked at like a gas station. I worked, just uh yeah, like, I was a dishwasher at an Italian restaurant.
I was a
Um,
dishwasher at a Chinese restaurant.
yeah, and
Right.
like, those were super fun jobs. I also had a great job, like, working in the Parks and Rec department,
Cool.
like, at a park, and these were just fun jobs, and I don't know, but I had classes in high school that kinda instilled in me an interest in literature. And so growing up and reading comic books and then learning that there's like also lots of novels out there to read. The only reason that I went to college is because I thought if I went and took classes at a community college, I can take classes and have professors that have read more novels than I have, and listen to them talk about novels, and learn about literature and English literature and history of literature, and this is just going to be interesting to me. So it's literally like, oh, I'm going to go to community college because to take classes on literature, and that's what
Terrific.
I did. And then I had people that I got a couple friends from high school that were like, you should, if you go to university, you can, you take more classes and you can get away from, where you home and like, do something with your life, Chris. I was like,
Right.
maybe, I guess I could give it a shot.
Right.
So, when I went to college, I went to Michigan State. I love taking English literature classes and classes on literature, and then I also really enjoyed classes on philosophy, and I absolutely still enjoyed, learning about philosophy and thinking about philosophy, especially I would say British analytic philosophy. So we're talking about Bertrand Russell, we're talking about Wittgenstein, um, like not the continental idealists, but the analytical, logical philosophy that is empiricism. And part of that was reading Francis Bacon.
Wow.
And I loved reading the essays of Francis Bacon. And in fact, those were incredibly transformative for me. The essays of Francis Bacon about, amongst other things, his essay on reading or on learning, but his essays on what science is for and what we can do with science. We can remake the world and make it a better place, and a place that is governed not by superstition or intuition, but the place that is governed by reason. And wouldn't it be great if one day we could live in a world which is governed by reason? And through that, not just through his writing, but also through how he lived. By day, he was the equivalent of like working at the State Department. So he was a kind of a diplomat, or not quite a diplomat, but working in like the foreign ministry of his day, the Queen's Court. But at nighttime, he was a philosopher, and he was like pioneering the systems of empiricism. So this is what it somehow dawned on me that, if you go into law, you can use your skills at rhetoric and skills in language and communication, but you're also using your logical skills that you've learned through philosophy. You put those two together, the logic and philosophy with the skills in rhetoric, and how that can be applied is law. In one of the areas that is applied is law. And I thought, well, maybe that's an area that would be interesting to me. And literally that was it. I was just like, I'm just going to go to law school where whoever accepts me is fine. I don't have any big ambitions to become a white collar attorney or to make millions of dollars or to be rich. I just thought that it would be kind of a challenge. It would be a challenge that would be fulfilling to apply my mind and my skills in logic and in rhetoric in a constructive fashion and a practical fashion, as opposed to trying to be a novelist or trying to be a philosopher. Apply those skills to the real world. So this is why I went to law school, and this is why I was definitely interested in securities, the financial market, because I went to law school in New
Okay.
York City,
Okay.
and so I was not in any way thinking about space or
Oh,
outer
wait.
space.
Stick with that for a second. You went to
Yeah,
law school in New York, and
yeah.
so by being surrounded by all the finance stuff from Wall Street, you kind of were you thinking veering off that direction?
I wanted to work in that field, and I do. I still do pay attention to the markets and regulation of the markets, and economic philosophers, and people who write about globalization and people who write about investing. I find it all super interesting.
Mhm.
Um, but the actual practice of it for me once I graduated from law school was like not in any way fulfilling
Okay.
or satisfying. Is that you can help corporation A is suing corporation B, and at the same time another branch of corporations A and B are negotiating negotiating with each other, and
Right.
so they'll at one day they'll just say that little lawsuit on the side that can go away. It's just a bargaining chip. So I felt um, I think that some people are fine just having a job and it's fine just to make money and to get by. But for whatever reason, I have like a I had the I couldn't be satisfied with that.
Right.
Like maybe it's a flaw in me where it's like I can't just be getting by. I have to be doing something that is personally fulfilling and hopefully fulfilling to some larger goal. Um, that's just something that is built up in me and from my family and probably from the way I grew up. But I remember as a little kid, my dad started recycling in the 36th District Court in Detroit. He was like the pioneer who said, like, this court should recycle, and they didn't want to pay him. So he's like, well, I'll recycle after my day is over.
Okay.
And there was news stories written about him.
Wow.
Like, who is this guy who's starting recycling at the court systems in Detroit? Um, and the quote that I remember as a little kid, like my dad being quoted in the newspaper, was, it's not enough just to pay your taxes and abide by the law. You have to do something too. You have to give back something too.
Brilliant.
And that type of like
That's
moral intelligence
yep.
and insight, I think that was profoundly influential on me. Like just me reading it in the like my dad said that and
Yeah.
and instilled that somehow just through example. It's not like he lectured us, but he said that he believed it. It's not just enough to pay your taxes and abide by the law. You have to give something back too. And from that, and I think also like growing up Gen X, listening to punk rock, going to punk rock shows, hanging out with skaters, the idea of just working in a corporate job, there's no way I could do it. There's no way that I would settle for it. I would walk out like if that's merely all I'm for. So in that, once I graduated from law school and found these areas of law unfulfilling, I immediately was like, well, I'm going to have to start taking night classes. I took a night class on I took a night class on international law because international law at my law school, or at least from my perspective, was seen as quite aristocratic.
Right.
And
Yep.
only the best people, the smartest thinkers could ever venture into this lofty realm of international law.
Okay.
Whereas the people that went to my law school, New York Law School, they build litigators,
Right.
and like, public defendants, it's street law and it's gritty. So I didn't take any international law classes, but once I graduated, I took night classes at NYU, at the Center for Continuing and Professional Studies. I had a maritime lawyer, Howard Schiffman. The textbook that we had was a textbook on international law, and as I'm flipping through it at the height of the 2007 2008 financial crisis, I'm flipping through this textbook in Lower Manhattan. There's a chapter on international law, on aviation law,
Okay.
and then the last couple pages of the chapter was on space law.
Cool.
And I could not believe that this existed. I couldn't believe that there was something that there was called the Outer Space Treaty,
Right.
and that there's an astronaut agreement and there's a moon agreement. I couldn't believe really that. I was like, you have to be making this up. And it was an unassigned chapter, and I didn't mention it to anybody else in my class. And I just, read those couple pages, and I was like, in my spare time, I'm going to Google around and see if this is real, see if there's anything more about it. And I remember buying the cheapest book on Amazon that had to do with space law, and then going down to the Strand bookstore and buying a couple books on space. And one of the books I bought was, I think I bought The Case from Mars by Robert Zubrin.
Yeah.
Because that was just like one of the books that they had, in the space section. So here I am, a lawyer, uninterested in, or totally unfamiliar with space activities in 2008. And I have The Case from Mars, and I have a book on space law by Robert Murgis, outer space law and policy. Glenn Reynolds and Harlan Burgess that I got on Amazon for like $8. And I was like, well, no one in this whole island of Manhattan is thinking about space law. I remember telling my friends that such a thing exists. You know, it sounds just unbelievable. And
Yeah.
you can sometimes, you know, we try and force space on students and on kids. You should get into this. But for me, how I grew up, maybe it's Gen X, maybe it's punk rock, et cetera, et cetera. But if I discovered something for myself and no one else knows about it, and it's my little thing that, oh my God, no one knows that I've discovered this.
Right.
I got super into it, and I started reading about it, and I came down I came down to DC and came to a space law conference and met actual real adults that practice space law. That I met Joanne Gabrinowitz from University of Mississippi.
I love
And
her.
I met Tanya Mason-Zwan from Leiden University. And I think I met a couple lawyers at NASA and a couple, you know, people wearing uniforms that were talking about space law and talking about the Outer Space Treaty. And they were serious and they have to actually think about it. It's part of their job to think about outer space.
Wait, sorry, give me some
was amazing.
timelines. When was this space law conference?
That would have been 2009, I believe.
Okay, so I met Gabrinowitz back in 2003 or two, even when I was working under. I was working on the NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts Research project on the space elevator, and she opened my eyes to some policy stuff that I had never considered. And then in 2008 was when I went to ISU. So I'm just kind of like trying to figure out the timeline, because those days there was a lot happening in the space law sector. Yeah, that conference. I'm curious. I don't think that conference was on my radar at that time. So
there's a photo taken of it somewhere, because we used to take photos at the Galloway event.
Right.
And like I'm in the back and I see some people that I was late to meet later, like, you know, right in the front. But yeah, I never took classes from Joanne Gabrinowitz, but she's still my teacher because I've learned so much from her on panels and in person.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, she's from Brooklyn, and I learned not just about space law, but literally how to be ethical and moral and principled person in the space law field. And it's folks like that you know, inspire me to not just, you know, do my job, but to do something more.
Yeah. Amazing. So that's 2008 and 9. You've kind of moved from, okay, I don't really want to be a corporate lawyer. That's not fulfilling. It might be good for other people, but it's not good for me. It's not where I want to go. You're kind of having your mind blown by this new path. Have you come across, because this story is really familiar but more recent, have you come across Katrina Malagrana?
Yeah, I know her.
All right, so I'll tell you, I'll like weave her into this story later on, but she had a very, very similar epiphany about 15 years after you. So
cool, excellent.
Yeah. All right, so great. Keep going, please. This is fascinating. I love this.
So, I mean, like you know, I'm learning about that space law exists and that's something that you can actually try and work in. And I saw, I think like the analogy that I had was, you know, if you're climbing a ladder, but you're only a couple steps up that ladder and you don't want to go up that ladder anyway, you may as well just hop off and try and find the actual pathway in life that you want to go down.
Right.
So you know, I was working in New York City and I had a lot of student loans to pay back, but I was still earning a decent amount of money, and I was able to put some money away in like a 401k. But I thought, I'm going to try and work in this field because there's no there's no way I'm going this way. I have to go this way because I'm going to give it a shot. So I told like my friends I'm going to try and work in this. I told my parents I'm going to try and work in space law. No one, I had like a pamphlet from Leiden, and you know, my friends and my family were like, "Is this? I don't know. Is this a real thing?" But right. I was like, I cashed out my 401k and took the penalty on it, and then went and applied to Leiden University in the Netherlands to do LLM and advanced masters in air and space law. You know, and straight up moved to the Netherlands to do it, a 1-year degree.
Yeah.
And going there, and that was my first educational experience where people are talking seriously about space and about international law. And I'm going to do a LLM in space law, but actually I don't even know any international law. Like the first couple weeks there, I was like, oh, these people in Europe, they're educated in international law. I am not. I knew New York law, like law that would be tested on the New York bar. So I like bought a book on Amazon.co.uk on like principles of international law, big 1,200 page textbook, and tried to read that over Christmas break in the Netherlands, like to catch up to where other people, like law students in Europe, got educated on international law. So while I'm learning international law, I'm also learning space law. They arrange, or you have to do an internship. So I do a free unpaid internship at the UN in Vienna. So I'm in my 30s. I'm now an unpaid intern in Vienna, and they can't pay you. You have to, and so you have to pay for your own way for everything.
Right.
But I had money saved up.
I have two
when I
interns
worked.
like that right now.
Yep.
Yep.
And that was, the payment for that is the education that I got in international diplomacy and how COPUOS works and how the UN works and what state tensions there are between states and who are the major players, who are the superpowers, who are the rising, who are the rising powers, who are the groups of states that care about particular issues. And that experience, I think, at UN COPUOS back in 2010 was like, I think transformative because it really educated me on international diplomacy and the people in America who have experience and expertise at international space diplomacy. That's a short list of people. And so that was, I think when I came back to America, having that international experience was very important for me and separated me from many other folks because space law is an international field. Space is international field. Therefore, you should be international in your expertise and your education and your expertise. So this is when I talk to people, I go, listen, I know Italian space lawyers who teach in China. I know American space lawyers who teach in Australia. I know, people from Belgium who are working in Dubai. You have to go where there's opportunities for your advancement, for your network, or wherever opportunities that seem interesting are. So nationality, of course, matters, but you go where there's opportunities for you. And because space and space diplomacy is international, and it will benefit you if you have that international component on your resume, as opposed to being purely national.
So, not discounting Michigan or NYU, but those schools would not be considered space schools, right? So for your field, it would be Ole Miss down there with Gabrinowitz and Hanlon, and it would be George Washington University for their space policy, and then McGill up in Montreal in Canada, and Leiden, right? Those are basically the space law, space policy centers of the world, right?
For English speakers, yeah. So, so I teach a space law class at Georgetown. It's just that's in the spring. It's international space law. In the fall is the commercial space law course that Karen Chenoweth from SpaceX and now at Relativity. She teaches that course. Of course, GW Space Policy Institute is an important place. And then in America, you mentioned Ole Miss in Mississippi, and then Lincoln, Nebraska at UNL. That's Franz von der Dunk. And then,
I haven't thought about Nebraska. Okay, that's not on my radar. I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah, and then there's Montreal, because I remember thinking like, do I want to go to Montreal? No, I want to go to Leiden. I want to go to the Netherlands. Like I've been to Canada. Right. And then in Europe, it's Leiden, but it's also Cologne University, and it's also, if you speak French, it's Paris 11 with Professor Akaleas.
Okay. Brilliant. All right, so keep going. So now you're starting to kind of branch out. You're starting to see the world with different eyes. You're building connections and relationships and partnerships and allies. what's next?
So from that, I mean, and this gets into, there isn't a pathway really for space lawyers, or there wasn't then, as compared to like the engineers and scientists. So if you wanted to work in space law, good luck. You have to figure it out for yourself where you can work and who needs you. So I did that unpaid internship at the UN. That I came back to America, and I found out about ISU, and people were saying you should go do the ISU summer program. But in the meantime, and so I applied for it, and I was like, okay, this summer, are you going to go off to ISU? But in the meantime, what are you going to do this spring? So I had made a couple connections at NASA, and I went to NASA and said, I'm a lawyer in New York. I have worked at the UN, and I'm going to go off in a couple months to do ISU. But in the meantime, is there any opportunities for me here? And they said, wow, you have UN experience and you're a lawyer. Well, we can't hire you, but you can be an unpaid intern. And I was like, certainly, let's do it. So I was an unpaid intern at the NASA Office of International and Interagency Relations, which was another excellent experience because you really got thrown into the deep end of learning how a space agency does international cooperation and accomplishes it on a practical, tactical level, how they do it, how they accomplish it. And that's really where you see that lawyers, especially lawyers at space agencies, serve the client. They serve the space agency and the agency's goals. And it's really, give them counsel and assist them in coming up with the agreements that would be between the agency and the outside partner. So it's seeing how a space agency does international cooperation. And then I went off to ISU. And from there, my expertise before that was, law, international law, and what a space agency does. But now I'm learning about all the other areas of space activities, like how do you actually move in space? What are celestial mechanics? What is space flight medicine? What are planetary sciences? What are the other disciplines that, if you're going to talk about space law and governance, you should have a basic understanding of the language and the concepts that are being used elsewhere in the space field. So I can't contradict and argue with somebody who does spaceflight medicine, but I can know what they're talking about when they're making points. And the same is true if I'm talking to the scientists and the engineers. I generally understand the topics that they're talking about. And that's the main benefit of ISU, is that you're going to specialize in your discipline, but you should be aware of the other disciplines, because space it's a small community, but you should know about all the other areas that are happening in space, so that it'll make what you're going to work in, better and more informed. So when I talk about space law, it's grounded in space activities and not merely abstract, theoretical issues in space law.
I often say that an ISU education is wide but not deep.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah,
and I love it for that. I was the U.S. alumni president 2 different times, and so I'm pretty happy about what this organization has done for the folks here in the United States. Well, a generalist education is priceless.
Oh yeah,
in this sector. Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I went and did that. And then I went and did the master's at ISU. Why? Because they had scholarship money.
Is that your third master's? So your first law, and then LLM, and then
it was JD, which was 3 years,
Yep.
and then a LLM, which is 1 year, and then a master's degree at ISU, which is another year.
That's a lot of master's degrees. I'm just gonna say congratulations. That's
I mean, they get easier when you've already done one. You're like, I know how to do that. And also, like, I never took classes on like how to take classes. I never took classes on how to study or how to write. They don't really offer those. They just go, well, if you're smart, you'll figure it out, or somebody will teach you somewhere else.
Yeah.
This class is about this topic. I went and did the master's, and part of that was an internship component for ISU. So I did my internship, my third internship, at ESA headquarters in Paris.
Right.
Where the meetings are in French, but the documents are in English. So my facility with French is not quite at the level of discussing international law and space law. But it was still a very interesting experience to work at another space agency because, frankly, ESA is more like the United Nations than it is like NASA, in
Yeah.
that it is beholden to the will and funding and interests of member states,
Yeah.
just like the UN.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and it is another international organization like the United Nations. Yet its purpose is to, explore and use and do space science. So that was incredibly interesting to see how another space agency works. And I think all space agencies have some things in common, but they all have something that are unique to them. And ESA is a very interesting space agency. So I went and did that. And in the course of all these internships and moving elsewhere around the world and trying to build a name and find who could pay for me to continue living in space law, I did meet quite a number of space lawyers out there and people that were interested in space law and space policy, um, and the other social science areas. And I met excellent space lawyers at the International Astronautical Congress
Okay.
and through the International Institute of Space Law, the IISL. And the IISL does colloquia every year at the IAC. So I went to my first IAC in Prague
Okay.
and met space lawyers in the IISL from like a whole host of countries
Right.
that are all interested in legal aspects of spaceflight. And the topics and the conversations and the papers presented were all super fascinating. And you meet these honestly like inspiring people. There's so many people, especially in the ISL, who are just fascinating and inspiring people that it's like they don't even know how inspiring and unique they are. They don't really know, or they may have some inkling that like, wow, you're actually really, really inspiring in who you are as a person and what you've done with your life. And to be around those people, it's the same thing with like ISU. You're around people that are inspiring because of who they are and what they've done and what
They all want to make the world a better place, right? They've like just decided that this is how they're going to do it, is making the world a better place. This is where they're putting their effort. It is quite amazing. Yeah.
And they're like, some of the people at ISU, I was on a team project, and the chair of the team project was Reinhold Ewald, the astronaut from ESA, who was he was on the Mir space station when a fire broke out, and he had to remain calm and deal with a fire in outer space and make sure that the cosmonauts remain calm and figure out and be like, wait a second, we're in zero gravity or in microgravity, therefore fire behaves differently. We have to respond in this manner. So somebody like that, when you get to work with somebody like that and they give you advice and kind of teach you how to work in this field, it's stuff like that are incredibly inspiring. Those people, you want to live up to what they can do. Right. And it's not just those people that are at the far end of the spectrum in terms of like they're important people with excellent jobs and excellent resumes. The other people who are inspiring at ISU are people that are like younger than you, who don't have a bunch of degrees, but because of their personality and what they're interested in and their approach to life, you're inspired by that. Yeah. Just the who they are as people was so just eye-opening to me,
What again, years? So that was maybe 2012. If I'm tracking that right, 2013.
Yeah, I did the SSP, the Space Studies program in Graz, and then I did the Masters 2012 to 13.
Okay. And so you're doing your ESA work in 2013 then.
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
So the course of that, I had been back to the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs and been back to Copois a couple times, to the extent where like the people that worked at the USA knew me, because I did an internship there, but they remembered me. And if I was there, they'd come over and say hi to me and shake my hand. And I remember that happened once where I was sitting in the observer row from the ISU delegation or maybe the IISL delegation. And somebody who worked at the UN who I knew came over and shook my hand and said, "Chris, it's great to see you again. Welcome back to Vienna. So glad to see you. Hope everything's working out in the space field." Sitting next to me was, who I didn't really know, was Ray Williamson, the executive director of Secure World.
Yeah, yeah.
And he was like, "Wow, you know people at the UN?" I was like, "Yeah, I did an internship here. They know me. I work in Space Law Matters." So I think I remember seeing a look of like, "Wow, I'm a little bit impressed that this person isn't just attending. He knows what's going on. He knows the actors." And I think because of that, when a position opened at Secure World, they knew me at Secure World and I knew of them, and the position, the the vacancy notice was passed along to me by somebody that said, you
Nice.
should apply for this,
Yeah, yeah,
you know? And that's how that, at least that's for me, and for many other people, that's how things developed for me, is that somebody else was looking out for me and said, oh, I see this opportunity and I know this person. I'm
right,
going to take that extra step that no one's asking me to do, that is not in my benefit but is to somebody else's benefit,
right.
and I'm going to connect this opportunity with this individual who wants to work in this field. And that is like, if there's anything we can do in the space field, it is not just think about ourselves, but think about up and coming people, connecting them to opportunities.
Right.
Because you're going to see things and know actors and know organizations that somebody new to the field is not going to know. So if you see an opportunity and you know young people, connect them to it. You have to do that.
Yeah, yeah. It's an obligation to the community, and the longer you're in this, the longer you're in this sector, the more chances there are to connect people.
Yeah.
It's because again, there's that stereotype that the only way into the industry is be some mythical rocket scientist, and there's a lot of different paths here, but most of them are relationship based.
Yeah.
Prove you're capable, prove that you're interested. I tell every intern I know, do a project. Succeed or fail doesn't matter, but do a thing where you're tested somehow. So is that how you got? Because Williamson, let's see, he picked up that Secure World Foundation post, maybe it was 2008, 2009. No,
Something like that. Yeah. Maybe just a little bit before that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because Michael something took it up after.
Yeah, Michael Simpson was the executive director when I was just coming in when I joined.
Okay. Wow, that's those are some pretty great people to work for. I mean, really, those are some good people to reputationally.
And I mean, when I because I know what it is like to be desperate to find a job and to be thinking maybe I'm not good enough for this field, and to be thinking nothing is going to come along because I don't have the right connections, I don't have the right resume. I desperately know that feeling, because that's what I felt, for years doing internships and looking for jobs and applying for jobs. And so when I meet students that are in that position, you can talk to them about space law, about what you know about space law, but you really also need to be saying and giving them like, okay, I know why you want to talk to me. You want to get a job in this field, and that's totally fine. Let's strategize on how to find you a job.
Awesome.
Like, let's strategize. I'm going to give you advice that this is what you need to go do. And if I can't hire you, I'm going to let you know. But that's the one thing that students are thinking about is, yeah, space is excellent. Can I work in this field?
Right. Yeah.
And that's the uncertain thing that can really affect people's their ego, and whether they're really, it can be really depressing if you're looking for a job for a long time, or you don't even know where to look for a job, or if there are jobs.
Yeah.
And so that's the one thing that we can, that's one of the one things that we can really do is coach people on how to get by in this field, what the resume looks like, but also how to apply for jobs, but also how to be professional. When you go to conferences, even if you're a student, have a LinkedIn profile that looks great, have business cards, take everything seriously, and realize that people are pressed for time. The people who have jobs are pressed for time. If you can assist them, so they're not going to have time to spend a whole lot of time talking to you, but if you can assist them somehow, writing a paper, working with them, editing something for them, assist them on some project that they don't have bandwidth to do, those things are not forgotten, and they
add up. They add up for sure. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left. This hour has just gone flying past. Let's focus on the Secure World Foundation. What are you doing there? Let's talk about some of the moon dialogue parts of this. What do you do as a law advisor? And I know that you're a professor at a couple different places, so definitely plug those places. But what do you do? What does it mean to be a law advisor at the Secure World Foundation?
Certainly. So we're an NGO, a non-governmental organization, which is focused on peaceful uses of outer space and space sustainability. So that's everything from, use of space for human and environmental security here on Earth to sustainability in low Earth orbit, whether it's space debris or conflict in low Earth orbit or conflict in space, and actors getting along. So space is a military domain, but it's also a commercial domain, but also a scientific domain and a domain for national prestige and national ambitions to play out. So amongst all those different actors and all those different uses of space, someone needs to act as a convener and as a convener of stakeholders so that we can share our views and our issues and our tensions with what we do in the space domain. So as a space law advisor, and I'm, am I the only lawyer on? Yeah, I'm the only lawyer on staff. We have other folks who are experts in space security, people who are experts in space policy, people who are experts in space commerce.
I know Brian Wheaton pretty well.
Yeah.
Again,
so
through the ISU connection. Yeah.
Definitely. But there's a lot of law that underpins those sustainability discussions. And whether it is the basic structure that we find in international space law and the Outer Space Treaty, or the more discrete and precise structures that we find in national space legislation, like Title 51 in the United States Code, or down to the granular level, the contractual level that we find in industry standards or contracts between, the launch provider and the payload operator. All of those areas the law underpins what we do in space. And so I am asked to discuss and advise on everything from, say, Title 51 or elements of, frequency regulation on a national level up to the international level, and on a variety of topics, whether it is, say, space debris or peaceful uses of outer space in the context of militarization. So guess what? I didn't learn international humanitarian law at law school. I didn't even really know that was an area of law, of Geneva Conventions and the principles of necessity, distinction, proportionality, and humanity. I didn't learn those things in law school, and I didn't learn them at Leiden either, because I took outer space law.
Right.
So once I got on the job, they're like, oh yeah, there's this other area of law called law of armed conflict that also applies to outer space. You need to go and learn that. So, I've had to go and do a couple, certificates in international humanitarian law to learn about law, which is usually only taught to people who work in military, about, the Geneva Convention, and law of armed conflict. And that applies to space as well. So I talk about some of those things. And when I talk about, say, anti-satellite tests or due regard in space, or what would constitute a violation of the UN Charter, or what triggers the right of self-defense, there we're talking about space. We're talking about international law, but it's not found in the Outer Space Treaty. It's applying the principles that we find elsewhere in law and applying them to the space domain. So it's that type of stuff. And in the last few years, I've become increasingly focused on the moon and lunar development, because here, when we get to the moon, finally we get to the moon, and we return to the moon with a variety of actors and a variety of nations doing a variety of different things. Here, we're not talking. Here, this is a different area of space law and space activities, because space activities beforehand, when we're just talking about orbits and use of orbits, we're talking about vehicles that are traveling. We're talking about things moving at orbital speed. We're talking about things that are, moving quickly in space, but not really permanently placed in those positions. When we get to the moon, we're talking about a destination. We're talking about another world where you go to develop, to live for a long period of time, to use resources. And so it's now we're talking about a destination. And how international law and space law applies to a world is different than how it applies to geosynchronous orbit. Because now
Right.
you're at a place where you can inhabit for a long period of time. You can go underground and possibly live in, put something in lunar caves, or you're going to do science in a permanently shadowed region, or you're going to use resources there. And now we have to transpose some of those elements that we find in terrestrial law, whether it's mining law, resources law, environmental law. We're transposing them to the space domain. And this is different from many other areas in space. So in the last couple of years, I've focused a little bit more on lunar law, not just from the exploration side, but because it is a new area of normative development, and there will be sustainability concerns. We focus more on commercial actors, and we focus more on the moon, because here are where there's sustainability concerns there as well, and peaceful uses of those spaces as well, and therefore Secure World needs to be setting the tone and setting the conversations for how law governs there.
I was unaware of this document until an hour ago. Unaware.
The Lunar Policy Handbook, yes.
Yeah. So I've taken a glance at it. It's 100 pages of different essays on this is how to be a good steward of our nearest neighbor. How does that relate to things like, yes, excellent, thank you. How does that relate to, is it complementary to the Artemis Accords? Is it complementary to the work that Michelle Hanlon is doing at For All Mankind? How does this document fit with everything else?
I mean, there's a reason that this is 100 pages long and not 500 pages long.
Right.
Hold on. How many pages?
Available, accessible to people.
It's 94 pages long with endnotes. Okay. So that's because when we talk about the moon, guess what? We have the Outer Space Treaty that concerns all of space, and in a few instances directly mentions the moon or would apply in principle to the moon. And then we have a few other treaties talking about, international responsibility and liability and registration convention and the moon agreement. And then when we get to the moon, that's about it. That's all we have for the moon.
Nope.
Like if I was to list off the explicit principles that are applicable to the moon, it would be a very short conversation to talk about what law applies to the moon that we can discreetly say.
Yeah.
And yet we are returning to the moon, as I mentioned before. In the next couple of years, there will be a variety of countries that go to the moon or return to the moon, a variety of commercial actors that go to the moon, and there will be, in the next decade, such a variety of new actions and activities that we do on the moon. And really, it's like, let's be rigorous in thinking through the precedent that we are setting. If we are going to the moon to perform X activity, I won't prejudice what I say about it. Let's say we're going to the moon to do a particular activity. If a nation state permits that activity, it's setting the precedent for other actors to go, well, state A did that on the moon. We can also do that on the moon, because Article 1, freedom, exploration, and use of the moon. So whatever we do on the moon, other actors will feel entitled to follow suit as seeing it as permissible and lawful and possibly a good idea. So if we go to the moon and we start using resources there, we can't really, have a problem with other actors going there right after us and doing it just as ambitiously and aggressively as we do, because we set the stage for it.
It's precedent.
So we are setting this precedent for however we're going to develop, this eighth continent, this next area of lunar activity, or this next area of human activity. Let's be a bit thinking about long-term consequences and second-order effects, and and make sure that we enshrine and think about our long-term interests, not just our short-term interests, but our long-term interests and our values. When we go to these places.
What do we take with us? It's one of those things that we talk about all the time. What are our values? What are our visions, our missions? What do we take with us when we go to space en masse? Not just a few, superhero test pilots, but when humanity moves to this eighth continent, what do we take with us? How do we act along the way? I think that's a vitally important question, kind of an underappreciated question.
So this Lunar Policy Handbook was developed by Secure World, but also by the other important Moon Dialogues conveners, which is Michelle Hanlon's For All Moonkind and Open Lunar Foundation and the excellent individuals over at Open Lunar, Jesse Kate Schengler, Chelsea Robinson, Jacob Malthouse, Antonino Salmeri, these experts at Open Lunar, along with SGAC, Space Generation Advisory Council.
Right.
And then we have MIT Media Lab, Space Exploration Initiative, also chipping in with some expertise and some writing, and Arizona State University's Interplanetary Initiative. We all got together to talk about, lunar norms and issues on the moon. And we did that for all of 2020 and 2021. And then we realized we need to write something to present to people that solidifies and like concretizes and puts in black letter all of our thinking on this. And that is this Moon Dialogues Lunar Policy Handbook. You've seen the link to it. It's available free download, all of our thinking. The first copy of this, Chris Hadfield gave to King George of England. The first physical copy, but we have other physical copies that we presented at the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space Legal Subcommittee just a few weeks ago. And the free PDF is there. You can download it and print it for yourself. And we're also going to set up print on demand copies if you want a physical copy, or you're going to order a bunch of physical copies for your class. So we're all NGOs, or we're not looking to make a profit out of it. And we're trying to set the conversations along the right path and think through the consequences of what we're doing on the moon.
This is fascinating. I absolutely love this stuff. It's why we host this show in the first place. Chris, I'm going to ask you to come back on this episode pretty soon, because I want to dig deeper into this. I want to dig into some of the nuts and the bolts of how we do this. So be prepared for that invite. It's going to be probably sooner rather than later. We did have somebody on the show ask a question about Starlink, our Starship. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share, since it's kind of a historic thing that's happening this week? The specific comment is, he's talking about the price per seat coming down dramatically. And we had, just for backstory, we had Robert Zubrin on our show maybe 3 months ago, and he was talking about how Starship could enable mass migration, not necessarily to the moon because it's actually harder, but going on to Mars. And he was saying, a $50,000 price tag for a family to go to Mars is within reach for a lot of people. Maybe it's 200,000, but it's still within reach for a lot of people. Considering that we're going to probably make history this week, do you have any? I know it's kind of off your normal beat, but do you have any thoughts on Starship?
I'm definitely paying attention to views like that this is a huge game changer in areas that we don't even really understand yet. Like, does this make space-based solar power possible? Does it change the game on space-based solar power? Does it change the game on other things that we want to do, whether it's mega constellations or manufacturing in space or commercial space stations in low Earth orbit, or successor to the ISS? I don't even know all the ways that this can change. This is where, as a space lawyer, I'm going to listen to the experts that think deeply about this. And that would include Zubrin, but other folks as well, that they're going to say, well, this is how this changes the dynamics and the numbers on building these things in space. Well, but from my perspective, and I look at it like this, I grew up reading comic books. When a new issue, when a number one comes out, you should pick it up because you never know what's going to happen.
Right.
And it could be the start of something that, you're going to be happy that you bought that first issue. Same thing with this, something to pay attention to. So you can you can remember where you were and what you were thinking of it.
Yep.
And I think that, I don't know, sometimes we tend to downplay how important things can be in the moment. We can say, oh yeah, that was interesting, but it's not going to work out like this. But I think it's still worth definitely paying attention to, and paying attention, maybe not believing all the hype out there, but I'm agnostic on things like hype. And when people know for certain that things are going to happen, I don't believe them. When people know for certain that things are not going to happen, I also don't believe them. Like, I don't pass judgment on it. And I think in when people are certain about their predictions, I never believe it, whether they're pessimistic or optimistic. There's no point in believing someone's certainty, because I myself don't have certainty about a lot of things. And I think the wisest people have doubt and don't have certainty.
Interesting, fascinating way to end that conversation. Chris, thanks for joining us this evening. We appreciate you joining us late at night for you. We're going to definitely be sending you an invite for a next conversation. We want to keep this conversation going. I want to dig deeper into the moon dialogues. As I said, I literally learned about them this evening, and it's an area that's kind of near and dear to my heart. So I want to spend some time on that. And maybe we can bring in Whedon as part of that, because I think he's got some pretty awesome insights as well. So thank you. Chris will ping you again soon. Space Law Advisor for the Secure World Foundation. Thanks a lot, Chris Johnson.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Good night.